I never told my daughter what was buried under the floor of my workshop. When she married a man who counted other people's money the way most folks count their own breath, I made sure he never got near the key. I was 300 miles away, sitting on my brother's back porch in Asheville, when my phone went off and my whole chest seized up. It was my granddaughter, and she was crying. "Grandpa, Mom and Uncle Desmond are at the house. They've got a crowbar and they're tearing up the workshop floor." Mom said you've been hiding money from the family for years. I set my coffee down so slow you'd think it was made of glass. 11 years. 11 years I'd kept that workshop locked, kept that floor exactly the way it was, kept a promise I made to a woman in a hospice bed who could barely hold my hand by the end. And here it was, the moment I'd been turning over in my mind for longer than I cared to admit. So when that call came, I didn't panic. I've been getting ready for this for a long, long time. Before I get into it, do me a favor and tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. I like to know who's out there. Now, let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand what kind of man I am and what kind of woman I lost. My name doesn't matter much for this story. What matters is that I spent 41 years married to the finest woman God ever made, a schoolteacher named Adeline who taught third grade in the same Cincinnati classroom for 30 years. We weren't rich. I ran a small cabinet shop, built kitchens and bookcases and the occasional coffin when the funeral home down the road got behind. We saved careful. We lived in a brick house on a quiet street in a neighborhood that used to be working folks and slowly turned into doctors and lawyers as the years went by. We never sold, though plenty offered. We had one daughter. I won't pretend she was an easy child. Bright as anything, restless, always wanting more than the next thing she had. Adeline used to say our girl was born with a hole in her she kept trying to fill with the wrong stuff. I thought she'd grow out of it. Some people never do. Adeline got sick when our daughter was 26, pancreatic. By the time they found it, there wasn't much to find a cure for. We had 14 months. I closed the shop those last few months and sat with her every day, and in that hospice room near the end, she made me promise her something. She took my hand, what was left of her grip, and she said, "Don't let her ruin herself with whatever I leave behind. Protect it. Make her earn the part of it that matters. Promise me." I promised. After Adeline passed, I did 3 things. I kept the cabinet shop, which I'd been thinking of selling, because I needed somewhere to put my hands and my grief. I put nearly everything we'd saved, plus the house, plus the small life insurance policy, into a trust. And I drove out to a lawyer 2 counties over, a quiet, careful man, and I built that trust the way you build a cabinet that's meant to outlast the man who made it. Tight joints, no gaps, nothing that swells or warps when the weather turns. Then I waited. My daughter married late, at 35, a fellow named Desmond who worked in what he called wealth advising, which as far as I could tell meant talking poor people into handing him their savings so he could charge them for losing it. He had a smile he turned on and off like a light switch. First time I shook his hand, he held it a beat too long and looked over my shoulder at the house, at the crown molding I'd cut myself, and I watched him do the math behind his eyes. I'd seen that look before, on buyers who pretended to love a piece of furniture while they were really pricing it for resale. I didn't say anything to my daughter. You can't tell a grown woman who she's allowed to love. Adeline taught me that the hard way, years back with a different fellow. So I kept quiet and I started keeping notes, not in a fancy way. Just an old spiral notebook I kept in the same locked drawer of my workbench where I keep my good chisels, dates, things said, the little tells. The first dinner at my house, before the appetizers even came out, when Desmond asked me, light as you please, whether the house was paid off and whether I'd thought about my estate planning. I wrote that down that night. The way my daughter started asking around year 2 whether I'd ever consider freeing up some equity so she and Desmond could invest it properly for the family. I wrote that down too. 11 years of small dinners, 11 years of birthday cards that arrived only when there was a wedding to pay for or a down payment to make. 11 years of watching a man I never trusted slowly steer my daughter further and further from the values her mother spent 26 years pouring into her. And the whole time, that workshop floor sat there, holding what it held, waiting. So when my granddaughter called me crying from the front yard, I already knew exactly what to do. "Sweetheart," I said, and I kept my voice as steady as I could for her sake. "I need you to do 3 things for me. First, go inside and stay in your room. This isn't your fight, and I don't want you anywhere near it. Second, I need you to text me your mother's exact words, anything you can remember her saying in the last hour. And third," I paused, "don't tell them you called me." "Okay," she whispered. "Grandpa, are you in trouble?" "No, baby, somebody else is. Now go on." I hung up and I called my lawyer. Same quiet, careful man. Older now, semi-retired. But he picked up on the second ring like he'd been expecting it for a decade, which, in a way, he had. "It's happening," I said. There was a pause on his end, and then I heard him let out a breath. "All right," he said. "You remember what we talked about?" "Every word." "Then let me make my calls. Don't engage with them until you're standing in that room. You hear me? Not one word over the phone." I told my brother I had to go. He drove me to the airport himself. Didn't ask too many questions, just gripped my shoulder at the curb and said, "Adeline would have been proud you kept your word." That nearly took the legs out from under me, but I held it together. I'm good at holding it together, built a whole life on it. The flight back to Cincinnati was 2 hours and felt like 10. I kept thinking about that hospice room, about the weight of her hand, about how a promise you make to the dying isn't really a promise to them. It's a promise to who you decide to be after they're gone. By the time the cab pulled up to my house, there were 2 cars in my driveway that didn't belong there. My daughter's SUV and Desmond's German sedan, the one he leased and called an investment in client confidence. The front door was unlocked. Inside, I could hear them in the back of the house, near the workshop, talking fast and low. I stood in my own living room for a second and looked at the picture of Adeline on the mantel. 38 years old in that photo, sun in her hair, holding our daughter on her hip outside the school where she taught. I touched the frame, then I walked back toward my workshop, slow and easy, the way you walk toward a dog you're not sure of. The door was open. They'd gotten through the lock, which didn't surprise me. What surprised me was the mess. They'd pulled up 3 of the floorboards near the back wall, the very ones, and Desmond was on his knees with a flashlight, sweating through his expensive shirt. My daughter stood over him with her arms crossed, and when she saw me in the doorway, she didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "Where is it?" she said. "No hello. No. How was your trip? We know it's here. The whole street knows you've been keeping cash. Mrs. Petticord saw you out here at all hours for years." I leaned against the doorframe. "And what exactly do you think is down there?" "Don't play dumb, Daddy." She spit the word like it tasted bad. "Desmond ran the numbers. The trust, the accounts we can see, the house. It doesn't add up to what you and Mom had. You're hiding money. You've been hiding it from your own family." Desmond stood up, brushing sawdust off his knees, and put on that smile. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're just trying to make sure the family's assets are protected and properly managed. You're not getting any younger, and frankly, the way these funds are sitting idle, you're losing money every year. We could put it to work." "Put it to work," I repeated. "For the family," my daughter added. I looked at the hole in my floor. Then I looked at the 2 of them, and I want to tell you, something in me that had been clenched tight for 11 years finally, slowly, began to relax, because this was it. This was the moment Adeline saw coming before I did. "All right," I said. "You want to know what's under the floor? Let me show you." I crossed the room, knelt down by the gap, and reached into the dark space between the joists. They both leaned in, Desmond practically vibrating. My hand closed on what I knew was there, what had been there for 11 years, and I pulled it out. It was a steel box, locked, about the size of a toolbox. My daughter's eyes lit up in a way that broke my heart, because for 1 second I could see the little girl who used to wait by the window for me to come home. And now that same face was lit up over a box she thought was full of cash. I set it on the workbench. I didn't open it. Instead, I reached into my jacket and pulled out a single brass key on a worn leather fob, the one I've carried in my pocket every single day for 11 years, and I set it next to the box. "Go ahead," I said. "Open it." Desmond grabbed the key before my daughter could. He fumbled it into the lock, threw the lid back, and his face fell so fast it was almost funny. There was no cash. There was no gold. There was a stack of folders, neat and labeled, a thick spiral notebook, a small velvet jewelry box, and an envelope with my daughter's name on it in her mother's handwriting. "What is this?" Desmond said, pawing through the folders. "Where's the money?" "There's no money in there," I said. There never was. My daughter snatched up the notebook and flipped it open. I watched her read the first page. I watched her face change. Because that notebook was 11 years of my notes, every dinner, every question, every calculated little move. I'd written it all down, dated, in my own hand. "This is, you've been writing about me?" Her voice cracked. "Like I'm some criminal?" "I've been keeping a record," I said quietly, "of a man who married my daughter and immediately started asking about my estate. Of a woman I love who slowly, year by year, started seeing her father as an account she hadn't unlocked yet." "That's not fair," she said, but the fight was already going out of her voice. "Open the folders," I said. She did. The first one was the trust, every page of it, including the part she'd never bothered to read. I'd had my lawyer draw it tight. Everything, the house, the savings, the insurance, all of it, was held in the trust, and the trust did exactly two things. It provided for my care for as long as I lived, and when I'm gone it provides a modest income to my daughter, paid out monthly, that she cannot borrow against, cannot sell, cannot hand to a husband to put to work. The bulk of the rest, the part she thought she was entitled to, was earmarked years ago for something else entirely. The second folder spelled it out. The Adeline Cabinet Shop, willed not to my daughter, but converted into a small foundation, a trade scholarship for kids coming out of the county juvenile system who want to learn a craft: carpentry, plumbing, electrical, honest work with their hands. Kids that everyone else had already written off. Desmond read that one over her shoulder and went pale. "You can't, we'll contest it," he sputtered. "This is clearly the product of undue—" "My lawyer is on his way here right now," I said. "He helped me build every word of it 11 years ago, when my mind was sharp and my grief was fresh and my reasons were clear. You're welcome to contest a document that predates your marriage by 3 years. I'll wait." The room went dead quiet. You could hear the furnace kick on in the basement. My daughter was still holding the notebook, but now she was staring at that envelope with her name on it, the one in her mother's hand. She set the notebook down. She picked the envelope up like it might burn her. "Mom wrote this 11 years ago, in the hospice, the last few days. She had the strength to. She made me promise to put it in that box and not give it to you until you came looking for what you thought was your money." My voice caught, and I let it. "She knew, sweetheart, before any of us. She knew this day would come, and she wanted to be the one to talk to you when it did." My daughter opened it with shaking hands. "I won't tell you everything that letter said, because some of it was between a mother and a daughter, and isn't mine to repeat. But I'll tell you, she didn't get past the second line before her knees gave a little, and she had to sit down on my work stool, the same stool she used to spin around on as a girl while I sanded a tabletop." Desmond, to his credit, finally read the room. "Sort of. Babe," he said, reaching for her. "Babe, we should go. We need to call an attorney. We have rights here." She didn't move. "There are no rights here for you," I told him. And I'm not proud of how good it felt to say it. There's a prenuptial agreement my daughter signed, that you signed, that keeps every premarital asset and everything in that trust separate property. My lawyer made sure of it before the wedding, as a favor to a man protecting his only child. You signed it in his office. You probably didn't read it either. You two have that in common." He looked at my daughter. She still wasn't looking at him. She was reading her mother's letter, tears running off her chin onto the paper, and she wasn't wiping them away. I'll tell you the part the people in my comments always seem to feel in their bones, because so many of them have lived it. There's a particular kind of grief in watching your own child become someone your spouse wouldn't recognize. For 11 years, I carried it alone because there was no one left to share it with. The one person who would have understood was the one who saw it coming and made me promise to fix it. Desmond left first. He actually left, walked right out, got in his leased German car, and drove off, and left her sitting there on a work stool in a torn-up workshop, crying over her dead mother's handwriting. That told me everything I'd suspected for 11 years, and everything she'd refused to see. A man who's there for the box and not the person doesn't stick around once the box turns out to be empty. I sat down on the floor next to my daughter, my old knees popping, the way I used to sit on that same floor and let her hand me nails when she was 4 years old. I didn't say "I told you so." I didn't say anything for a long while. I just let her cry. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "Did you ever love him, Desmond?" "No," I said honestly. "But I loved you enough to let you make your own mistake. And I loved your mother enough to make sure the mistake couldn't take everything down with it. I read about it," she said, "last year. How to challenge a trust, whether a spouse could claim inherited property in Ohio. I looked it up." She laughed, an awful, broken little laugh. "I can't believe I'm telling you that." "I know you did," I said gently. "I have a habit of checking the computer your daughter uses for her homework, the one you sometimes borrow." I let that sit. "You're not a bad person, sweetheart. You just spent 11 years listening to a man who was never going to love you for free, and you forgot what your mother taught you. Real wealth isn't what's in the box. It's who stays in the room when the box turns out to be empty." She put her head on my shoulder, this 36-year-old woman who I still saw as a kid in pigtails, and we sat there in the wreckage of my workshop floor, and I held my daughter for the first time in I don't know how many years. My lawyer arrived 20 minutes later. By then, Desmond was long gone and would, within the month, be served with divorce papers, not by me, but by my daughter, who used the small bit of money in her own name to do it the right way. My lawyer looked at the hole in the floor, at the steel box, at the two of us sitting there, and he just nodded, the way one craftsman nods at another when the joints came out tight after all. In the weeks after, my daughter started coming by on Sundays again, not for dinner with an angle to it, just to sit. She'd ask about Adeline, real questions, the kind she never used to want answers to. I told her things I'd been saving, how her mother used to grade papers at the kitchen table at 11 at night and still get up at 6 to braid her hair, how her mother fought me for 2 years to send her to the better school across town and won, how the last clear thing her mother said wasn't about money at all. My granddaughter started spending Saturdays in the workshop with me, learning to sand and measure and respect a sharp tool. She's got good hands, patient, like her great-grandmother, though she never met her. We repaired the floor together, the three of us. My daughter, who hadn't held a hammer in her life, knelt down and helped me set those boards back in. And we did it right. No gaps, tight joints, the way it's meant to be done. The steel box went back where it was, but it doesn't hold the same things anymore. The notebook of grievances I burned. I didn't need it. It had done its job, and a man shouldn't carry a record of his daughter's worst years once she's chosen to walk out of them. The foundation runs now. We funded our first 6 kids last fall, 6 young people the world had given up on, learning to build something with their hands. One of them, a quiet boy of 17, finished a maple bookcase last month, ran his palm over the joint where 2 pieces met seamless, and looked at me like he'd just discovered he was worth something. I had to step outside for a minute after that. I told Adeline about him that night, out loud, the way I do. I think she'd have liked him. Desmond moved to another state, found another family with another floor to wonder about, I imagine. That's not my problem anymore. Here's what I keep coming back to, sitting in my shop in the evenings now with sawdust and the light. People spend so much time guarding the box. They put their whole lives into the lock, into the key, into making sure nobody gets what's theirs, and they miss the thing standing right in front of them the whole time. My daughter thought there was treasure under that floor. There was. It just wasn't the kind you can carry out in your arms. It was a letter from her mother, waiting 11 years to forgive her in advance. If there's one thing I hope you take from an old man's story, it's this. Don't wait until someone's tearing up your floor to tell them what you've been protecting and why. Tell your children what matters before you teach them what's worth. Money runs out. Houses get sold. But the lessons you leave, the love you build joint by joint, slow and patient and meant to last, that's the only inheritance that never warps and never fades. And if there's somebody in your life you've been keeping at arm's length, somebody who maybe lost their way the same as my girl did, go on and reach out before the floorboards come up. Most people aren't looking for treasure. They're looking for proof. Somebody stayed. So tell me where you're listening from, and tell me about the thing you've been protecting. I read everyone, and I'll see you in the next story.